Right now, roughly 20% of the world's daily oil consumption is basically squeezing through this single geographic bottleneck. And it's completely surrounded by military tripwires.
Yeah, it really is.
And, the moment one of those tripwires snaps, whether that's from a calculated strike or literally just a radar glitch, the baseline price of, practically everything you buy is going to jump.
Exactly. I mean, we are watching a pretty terrifying masterclass in globalized vulnerability right now.
For sure.
It's the scenario where the physical conflict, it might be contained to one specific region, but the economic shockwaves they're mechanically engineered to hit every single bank account on the planet.
And that is exactly the reality we're unpacking today. Welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at a critical briefing titled, The Brink of Global Escalation, Middle East Tensions Underway.
It's a heavy one.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive isn't just to, recap the military headlines about the United States, Israel, and Iran. We really want to map out the exact mechanics of how a localized military alert instantly translates into a global economic shock.
Right, connecting those dots.
Exactly. We want to show you the math behind the panic, basically.
Yeah.
And how international oil prices dictate your daily living costs.
Which is so important because people are understandably asking if this is the start of a world war.
Right. You hear that everywhere right now.
You do, but framing it that way kind of misses the core threat of modern geopolitics. You really do not need a declared world war to suffer a global economic casualty.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great point.
Because of the extreme integration of modern energy markets, it basically guarantees that the fallout from this specific tension, it's going to end up on your doorstep, regardless of where you live.
So to understand that economic shock, I think we have to start with the physical trigger, right?
Yeah, the situation on the ground.
Right. Because the military posture right now is at an absolute boiling point. Based on the briefing, Israel is operating in a state of heightened military readiness. And the U.S. has its regional defense systems fully activated. They're monitoring naval forces and regional cases around the clock.
Right.
And then Iran has issued these really categorical warnings that any major strike on its territory or its sphere of influence will trigger a massive response.
And that phrase right there, sphere of influence, that is the most dangerous variable in this whole equation.
Really? Why that specific phrase?
Because we aren't looking at a traditional linear battlefield. It's not two state militaries just lining up across a border.
Right. It's way more complicated than that.
Exactly. We're looking at a highly decentralized network of proxy groups operating across multiple borders. And these groups, they're allied with, but not always perfectly controlled by a central state.
Okay, so that fundamentally changes the rules of engagement then.
It completely changes them.
Because, in a state-on-state conflict, deterrence is at least somewhat straightforward. There's a clear return address for any attack, right?
Right. Who fired the missile.
Exactly. But proxy networks provide this layer of asymmetric warfare. And the source material specifically warns that armed groups allied with Iran in several nearby regions could dramatically increase their own attacks.
Yeah, expanding the fighting across multiple countries simultaneously.
Is terrifying.
It is, because the architecture of proxy warfare practically guarantees escalation. Think about it. If an allied group in a neighboring country decides to launch an uncoordinated rocket attack, the retaliatory strike doesn't just hit that isolated group.
It triggers a whole chain reaction.
Exactly. It triggers a cascading defense pact. Suddenly, a skirmish in one country forces military assets in 3 other countries to mobilize. Traditional deterrence models completely fail in this environment.
Because you just can't reliably predict the chain reaction.
You really can't.
It's like a pitch black room rigged with tripwires. You aren't just trying to negotiate a ceasefire between 2 presidents sitting at a table.
Right.
You're trying to put a lid on this fragmented network of state and non-state actors. And they all have their own local objectives.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Like a misidentified drone, or a strike that hits slightly off target, or even just a rogue local commander. Any of that can light up the entire room in a matter of hours.
And to make matters worse, this specific room happens to house the central artery of the global energy system.
Right, which brings us to the core of the issue. The Middle East isn't just a geopolitical flashpoint. It is the world's energy sorting facility.
The literal bottleneck.
Yes. The shipping routes running through this region, they are the geographic bottlenecks that keep the entire global economy functioning.
Absolutely.
But I want to play devil's advocate for a second, or at least ask the skeptical question.
Sure, go for it.
I want to get into the actual mechanics here. We hear about shipping routes on the news all the time. But why does the mere threat to these routes spike global oil prices before a single drop of oil is actually lost?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because we know it's not a one-to-one physical shortage driving the price today. The oil is still there. So what's happening?
Well, we're basically dealing with the mechanics of forward pricing and risk premiums. The global oil market, it doesn't trade based on what is physically happening today.
Okay.
It trades on the probability of what might happen next month. When energy firms or global logistics giants or even sovereign nations buy oil, they are purchasing futures contracts.
Right, locking it in.
Exactly. They're locking in their supply for 30, 60, or 90 days out just to ensure their economies don't grind to a halt.
So when military tensions flare up, when there are continuous air defense alerts issued near these shipping straits, the market isn't reacting to a sunken ship.
No, not at all.
It's pricing in the mathematical probability of a sunken ship.
Yes. We aren't pricing in the physical loss of oil. We are pricing in the mathematics of panic.
Wow. Mathematics of panic.
It's true. I mean, consider the maritime insurance industry. Massive crude oil tankers require extraordinary insurance coverage, specifically war risk premiums just to transit through conflict zones.
Oh, of course. I didn't even think about the insurance side of it.
It's huge. The moment the U.S., Israel, and Iran elevate their military readiness, the underwriters, over at the major maritime insurance hubs in London, they instantly recalculate the risk of a tanker becoming collateral damage.
And I'm guessing those premiums skyrocket overnight.
Oh, absolutely. Millions of dollars in additional costs are suddenly required just to legally sail a ship through the strait.
Just for one trip.
Just for one trip. And simultaneously, the buyers who rely on that oil, they look at the military posturing and realize, hey, there's a massive statistical chance those shipping lanes close entirely next week.
So they panic buy.
Exactly. Their immediate rational response is to stockpile available crude right now at literally whatever price it takes.
So you have an artificial surge in immediate demand fueled by panic.
Colliding with a sudden, massive spike in the logistical cost of moving the product due to those insurance premiums.
That is wild. So the physical supply of oil in the world hasn't changed by a single barrel.
Not one drop.
But the global baseline price just jumped. The risk itself has been monetized and attached to the commodity.
Yes, that risk premium is basically a phantom weight added to every single barrel. And because oil is priced globally, a localized spike in insurance premiums in a Middle Eastern strait, it instantly raises the cost of crude oil for a refinery in Texas.
Or a manufacturing plant in Germany.
Or a shipping port in Tokyo. It's instant. Furthermore, if shipping companies deem the risk too high, they reroute their vessels entirely.
Right, they just avoid the area.
Yeah, and bypassing these Middle Eastern bottlenecks often means sailing completely around the continent of Africa.
Which takes way longer.
It adds weeks to the transit time, it burns exponentially more fuel, but honestly, more importantly, it ties up global shipping capacity.
Oh, right, because the ship is busy for an extra 2 weeks.
Exactly. If a tanker takes an extra 14 days to complete its route, that ship is unavailable for its next scheduled cargo pickup.
Which creates a massive capacity crunch. There are suddenly fewer ships available globally to move goods, which means the freight rates for moving anything like, not just oil, literally anything, shoot up across the board.
The whole logistics network tightens to the breaking point, and the cost of moving physical matter across the planet becomes drastically more expensive.
Which brings this directly to the listener's wallet.
Yeah, this is where it hits home.
Because we hear rising oil prices, and we instantly think of the numbers at the local gas station pump.
Naturally.
But passenger vehicle fuel is just the most visible, superficial symptom of this. The real threat to your daily living costs is what I call the hidden geopolitical tax.
Oh, that's a perfect way to describe it. Because the gas pump is really just the consumer-facing interface of a much deeper industrial reality. Petroleum isn't just fuel for your car. It is the fundamental currency of movement and production for the entire global supply chain.
Let's actually trace the mechanics of that hidden tax. Because modern supply chains operate on razor-thin margins.
2%.
And they use these just-in-time delivery models.
Yeah.
They intentionally do not hold massive buffers of inventory to absorb sudden energy shocks.
It's all about efficiency.
Right. So when the baseline cost of diesel and maritime bunker fuel rises globally, the cost of moving agricultural products, raw construction materials, essential medicines, it all rises in lockstep.
It does. It's the embedded energy cost of the goods themselves. I mean, think about industrial agriculture. It relies heavily on petroleum-based fertilizers.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of the fertilizer.
Yeah, and energy-intensive harvesting and processing.
Yeah.
When the geopolitical risk premium inflates the cost of oil, the cost of producing raw materials surges before the product is even loaded onto a truck or a cargo ship.
So by the time a consumer good reaches a local grocery store or a pharmacy, its price has been sequentially inflated at every single step of the supply chain.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
fertilizer cost more, the processing plant's energy bill was higher.
The maritime freight rate doubled because of rerouting and insurance.
Yep. And the local distribution hub paid more for the diesel in their delivery fleet. And none of those entities have the profit margins to just, absorb a 15% spike in their operating costs.
They have to pass it on.
They're forced to pass the cost forward to the next link in the chain. This is the textbook definition of cost push inflation.
Cost push inflation, okay.
Right. And the scary part is central banks cannot control this type of inflation by simply raising domestic interest rates because it's an external supply side shock.
So the end consumer is forced to absorb the cumulative cost of that naval anxiety halfway across the world.
That's exactly what happens.
It completely recontextualizes the concept of local inflation.
Yeah.
Like, you look at your grocery receipt, you're frustrated that the price of basic staples has gone up.
Which we all are.
Right, but you aren't just paying for the agricultural product. You are paying a localized premium to cover the cost of a military standoff thousands of miles away.
Yeah.
It's like an inescapable tax on existence.
It really is. It fundamentally alters the baseline cost of living for millions of people globally. And, the source material highlights this as a severe economic strain.
Yeah.
But I think it is crucial that we pivot from the macroeconomic charts for a second to the immediate physical reality for those living inside the conflict zone.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because the economic shockwaves hitting global markets, that's kind of the sterile, sanitized version of the actual devastation happening on the ground.
It really is.
When a supply chain is disrupted globally, it causes inflation. But when a supply chain is severed locally inside a conflict zone, it causes a total humanitarian collapse.
And financial models often just abstract away that human toll. We are looking at massive populations of innocent civilians forced to flee their homes.
Just trying to survive.
Exactly. This isn't merely a disruption of consumer goods for them. It is the collapse of the basic pillars of civilian survival. Human rights organizations are documenting critical, life-threatening shortages of food, medicine, and electricity right now.
Because modern urban infrastructure is incredibly fragile.
So fragile.
When the localized energy supply fails, the secondary systems immediately go offline. Water sanitation facilities, they cannot operate without power.
No, they can't.
And hospitals are forced to rely on limited generator fuel just to keep intensive care units and basic medical equipment running.
It results in cascading infrastructure failures. And then the mass displacement of civilians creates an immediate, desperate density of need in surrounding areas.
Areas that are already struggling.
Right. Areas that are entirely unequipped to handle the influx of refugees. The systemic collapse moves way faster than humanitarian aid can possibly be deployed. It just creates immediate and compounding human suffering.
Which really explains this stark reality we're seeing. It explains the frantic, high-stakes diplomatic scramble happening behind the scenes.
Yes, absolutely.
The briefing notes that world leaders from the United Nations, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East are pushing urgently for dialogue. And they aren't just issuing boilerplate political statements.
This isn't just PR.
They're desperately trying to force de-escalation before the situation breaches the point of no return.
Because these leaders are operating under a dual mandate of stability. The diplomatic urgency is obviously driven by the immediate moral imperative to stop an escalating humanitarian catastrophe.
Right.
But it is equally driven by the terrifying macroeconomic projections sitting on their own desks.
Right. A European or Asian leader looks at this situation and obviously sees the immediate loss of civilian lives. But they also see the very real threat of cost-push inflation instantly destabilizing their own domestic economies. They know that if those maritime bottlenecks remain threatened, their manufacturing sectors will stall.
Their energy grids will face shortages.
And your citizens will face unbearable costs of living.
The stakes are intensely localized for the civilians caught in the crossfire, but the economic sword of Damocles is hanging over the entire global economy.
Yeah.
every nation is deeply invested in preventing those proxy tripwires from snapping.
And we're currently in this highly compressed window where diplomatic leverage is basically racing against military momentum.
A race against time.
Literally.
Yeah.
The decisions made in the coming days will dictate whether this network of alliances is disarmed or fully triggered. Let's consolidate what we've mapped out today, tracing this from the physical threat to the economic reality.
Good idea. So we started with the immediate military trigger. The United States, Israel, and Iran operating at maximum readiness in an environment saturated with decentralized proxy groups.
Right.
We looked at how that specific geographic tension acts as a massive multiplier, directly threatening the world's most critical energy shipping routes.
Then we broke down the mechanics of the market panic, showing how forward pricing, maritime insurance spikes, and the threat of shipping capacity crunches artificially inflate the price of crude oil.
Long before a single supply line is physically cut.
Exactly. The risk itself becomes a globally traded commodity.
And then we followed that inflated cost straight into the local economy, demonstrating how the hidden geopolitical tax drives up the baseline cost of agricultural production, medicine, and transport.
Causing severe inflationary strain for consumers everywhere.
Yeah. All of this occurring while a devastating and immediate humanitarian crisis unfolds for the innocent civilians actually living in the conflict zone, dealing with those cascading infrastructure failures and displacement.
So the key takeaway for you listening right now is to understand the underlying architecture of this crisis. When you see the headlines about military alerts, you now know the exact mathematical path those alerts take to reach your bank account.
The situation remains highly fluid, and staying informed on the mechanics rather than just the rhetoric is so essential.
Absolutely.
I will leave you with this final thought to consider as you watch this situation develop. Over the past few decades, we have optimized our world for extreme globalized efficiency. We have built these brilliant, perfectly tuned, just-in-time supply chains that connect continents seamlessly.
But in doing so, we've inadvertently engineered a system of inescapable local vulnerability.
Exactly. We have designed a world where a radar glitch or a rogue missile strike in a distant strait doesn't just make the history books.
Right.
It actively reaches into your community and alters the fundamental cost of your survival. The efficiency of the global market is exactly what makes it so fragile.
We traded resilience for efficiency, and the bill for that trade is constantly being recalculated. We will be tracking these geopolitical tripwires closely. See you on the next deep dive.